Now live now. If anybody's tuning in, it's time to tune in and let everybody know that this is a live podcast and you can comment. It's the Never Again podcast series. And we're going to be on various streaming sources. We'll tell you about it in a moment. So what I know what we're talking about tonight is going to be with our special guests. We're going to be discussing the failed Jewish leadership, basically in Israel as well as the Diaspora. And with us tonight, we have Meir Weinstein, who's the founder of Israel Now, as well as past director of the Canadian JDL. And we also have with us Meir Jolovitz. So we have a pair of mayors, or a nightmare as I call it, who's the past national executive director of the ZOA, as well as national chairman of the JDL. I want everybody to know that that's me. I'm the silent partner in the corner. But most importantly, start turning on right now. Join the conversation, live streaming. Give us your comments on YouTube and on Facebook and on Twitter. You can join in. You can give our comments. And all you pro-pallies out there, I want to hear where you can prove me that Israel is not 100% right. Chime in and prove me wrong. Oh no, a little technical difficulty, but we'll be right with you. Well, the part froze up. I'm shocked. Meir, I'm going to bring you guys on the screen unless if this music starts playing again. How's that sound?
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Guys, I'll see you a little later.
Perfect. Welcome to everyone joining us tonight. I'm Meir Weinstein. I'm joined with Meir Jolovitz. We're discussing tonight Jewish leadership, the failure of Jewish leadership. And we could call it, a crisis of Jewish leadership, but that sort of means that it's happening right now, just happened right now. That's not the case. This has been going on for years. Jewish leadership in North America, Jewish leadership certainly in Israel. And we're going to be discussing all that. And we invite people to post their questions or comments, and hopefully we'll have a chance that we can read them and respond to them as well. We have a picture. I'm hoping that Gary could show the picture of, there was a delegation of people from J Street that went to Israel to meet with the previous governments in Israel, headed by Naftali Bennett. It's important to show that because J Street, by and large, is responsible for making BDS organizations in the United States kosher. There it is. In the delegation was Jamal Bowman, who, thank God, lost an election last night. But he's a rabid Jew hater. He calls Israel an apartheid state. Has no problem with these pro-Hamas riots going on throughout North America, in particular because he's American in the United States. We just saw over the weekend in Los Angeles, pro-Hamas gangs descended on a synagogue, and there was violence, and Jews got hurt. Thank God some Jews actually fought back, but that's what's going on. That's going on also in Canada. And when we talk about Naftali Bennett, he's aspiring to make a return into politics in Israel. And if this is what he did then in 2021, we can expect the same thing, the sanctioning, this embracing of those that we should not be embracing. If anything, we should do everything to shun them from the Jewish community, and we should want proper leadership representing our Jewish communities on the political level, and the values of Judaism should be a top priority for Jewish leaderships. Instead, what we have from J Street are people who are, well, approximately 85% of the membership of J Street is all intermarried and they don't have Jewish values at all. They embrace Muhammad Abbas from the Palestinian Authority, who has the pay for slay policy, and he has never backtracked on it at all. And the pay per slay, what is that? For those who don't know, pay for slay policy is that when a terrorist murders Jews in Israel, Muhammad Abbas writes a check to the family of the terrorists. So this incentivizes the whole campaign to murder Jews. October 7th was a turning point for the Jewish people. October 7th brought it to home that the first victims of the slaughter, and the majority of the victims of the slaughter, were those who believed in peace and coexistence with people who support Hamas. Because the majority of people who live in Gaza support Hamas. So they believed in that. And many of them would bring people from Gaza into Israel proper. And it ended up, after investigation, that those very people who they were friends with took part in the slaughter of Jews on October 7th. And they were the ones who gave intelligence to Hamas, where they live, how to get in, intelligence, the surroundings, what to expect. Meir, join me. How are you? It's great to be with you.
Meir, always good to be with you, and tragically, the circumstances which we discuss are never pleasant. Permit me, if I may, just to modify a comment that you made in your introduction. You said October 7th was a turning point in affairs. I would argue, and I think you might agree, that October 7th ought to have been a turning point.
Mm-hmm.
And for too many people, and that's the reason we're discussing failed leadership, it was really not a turning point. I know that we'll address it in the hour that we have,
Yep.
but the end game for so many people, which was the two-state solution that we often talk about, as I refer to it, the two-state illusion or the two-state delusion.
Yep.
If ever there was a concept that should have been put to rest, October 7th should have put it to rest. And it's done quite the opposite with too many of Israel's antagonists. And tragically, it's actually accelerated the drive for a Palestinian state with so many of Israel's so-called friends. And so in an opening remark, I would suggest that whereas October 7th ought to have been the pivotal moment in recent history that changed everything, that made the others, those who sit on the other side of the political divide that you and I have shared for so long, it seems that it really hasn't affected them. And if it has, not in the proper direction. And that, as we'll discuss today, I think has a lot to do with the failed leadership, both in Israel and certainly in the Western world.
Listen, 100%. There's no question about it. But I am pointing out that there are some who survived from October 7th that they say they did believe in peace and they don't believe in it anymore, and they understand clearly what the intentions are of the Arabs, of the Muslims who live in Gaza. There's no question about it for them. Unfortunately, that's not everyone in Israel. That's not all the Jews in Israel. Still have those protests against the government. What do they propose? What are they proposing there when they're protesting Netanyahu's home, trying to storm in? What are they asking for?
For them, October 7th wasn't the pivotal moment in which Israel needed to wake up to the fact that it stood alone. When I say stood alone, I don't mean just among the family of nations in the Middle East. It stood alone if you look at the Western world. The European Union has turned on Israel. The United Nations has never been with Israel. And the so-called friends of Israel that we thought we had in Washington have also turned on Israel. There are some people who believed in the beginning, upset at the Democratic Party. Well, and today, when I will criticize America it should be made clear from the beginning that I'm talking about the Biden administration,
Right.
not America as a whole. The American administration has turned against Israel. They've actually used the fact that Israel was initially crippled in its ability to defend itself as an opportunity to actually leverage Israel into what they think is what they've called the day after. It's terribly tragic. And what's even worse is the leadership on our part, both in Israel and in the United States, has been so reluctant, afraid to call them out on this. We're so afraid that the few friends that we have might become less friendly if all of a sudden we pointed an accusatory finger and said that, listen, circumstances have shown that Israel stands alone. And if Israel understands that it stands alone, as it did, by the way, in the first week in June of 1967, Israel might do what Israel should have done when the war began. And it's something that they haven't done in a long, long time. And I will, during my remarks, address that aspect. And that is that Israel continues to fight a political war against its enemies rather than a military war. And as long as Israel fights a political war, it will lose. And the lessons of yesteryear have not been learned. And as I have the opportunity, I'll list the 4 issues which I think give evidence to the fact that we have this terrible fracture that has not been repaired by October 7th.
You know, remember the Biden administration, they appointed an envoy on anti-Semitism, Deborah Lipsek. And when they did that, in the whole committee to address anti-Semitism, they included CARE.
Yeah.
They included CARE in that. And CARE is one of the main organizations that promotes these pro-Hamas gangs terrorizing the Jewish community throughout the states, and the protests going on against Israel, all the viciousness that's going on. So that's the Biden administration. Also, just after getting elected as president, Linda Sarsour made some statements critical of the Biden administration, and Anthony Blinken paid her a visit and actually apologized to her. Now, can you imagine this? Linda Sarsour, who's a vicious Jew hater, and Anthony Blinken sucking up to her and apologizing to her. Anthony Blinken is a regular for J Street, and it's that failed. He's not a Jewish leader at all, but he's being presented as a good Jew, as a proud Jew. He's nothing like that at all. And he's selling Israel out, and he's trying to make Israel weaker. What does it mean the day after? Who goes to war and anyone says, tell us your plans for the day after? Well, the bottom line is they all hate our guts. They want to destroy Israel. They want to murder Israel. You don't allow them ever to come into Israel proper and work in Israel. You got to work out some kind of a policy and say, get out of here, leave. Just like they're doing in France right now with the new elections. There's a new mood in France to get rid of those who embrace the radical Islamic ideology and want to transform France into a caliphate. Good morning. That's what's going on in Israel with those who support Hamas, those who support the Islamic Jihad, the same thing. So there should be really a momentum in Israel to encourage, at the highest level in Israel, to encourage a policy of immigration leaving. That will diffuse the problem. But there's anything but. And the Biden administration certainly doesn't want to hear anything like that, and they will condemn Israel in any way going forward if Israel entertains that kind of thought. But, however, this is a fight for survival. Meir, go ahead.
The very predicate for this concept of the day after was actually established by Israel in the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
There was an oblique reference to the fact that the main goal of the war that Israel was launching against Hamas in Gaza was not only to return the hostages, that was a byproduct of the war. The purpose of the war was to, and the term that was used time and time again, was to destroy Hamas. It was to destroy Hamas. It was to destroy Hamas, its military, its infrastructure, everything that allowed Hamas to operate in Gaza. And we know that it had the full, and it still does, has the full support of the Palestinians. But the day after was built on the destruction of Hamas. That more after a couple of weeks, and all of a sudden Israel stopped talking about destroying Hamas, but rather defeating Hamas. And most recently, in an almost shameful reversal of its initial intentions, Israel is now turning to Blinken and his team and saying, you really don't expect Israel to lose to Hamas. If I may here, I'd like to bring up the four theoretical, not theoretical, but the four major issues which allow us to gauge where we stand in this divide between right and wrong. And it's remarkable how so many history will judge so many people as having stood on the wrong side of right. And allow me to mention them. In Israel, no different in the United States, we have the political divide between what they call conservative or liberal or right and left, what have you. In the United States, these issues aren't yet existential issues. In Israel, they are existential issues. If one wants to find out about leadership, and we all know where we stand politically, there are four issues which I think need to be brought to the fore, and to find out where leadership is on any or all of the four issues, you'll understand whether or not leadership has failed us in this modern age. Those issues are quite simple, and I'm talking about Israel, of course. The first issue that we're talking about is the fact that we're talking about the simple question. You ask a simple question, and these are questions that American Jewish leadership, and to a great extent Israeli leadership at every level, refuses to even touch upon. The first question: is the Arab war against Israel, or the Muslim war against the Jews, is it territorial or is it religious? At least tell us where you stand on that issue. Because if you answer incorrectly, and we know what the right answer is, it's not territorial, then we've already got a failed leadership. The second question which would be asked is, of course, is the conflict in the Middle East, is it defined by you, your organization, your ideology, as Israeli Arab, or is it defined as Israeli Palestinian? Because on the conservative or the right side of this debate, we know that this is an Arab war, Muslim war against Israel and the Jews. This is not a war. This is not an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The moment that we have surrendered that language, and we already have, by the way, almost every organization, I think I could name one or two that really haven't, we've already lost that debate. And as I say in all my lectures, all my speeches, we are engaged in a war of ideas, and it's a war that we are readily losing. The third issue, of course, is this concept of occupation. One would ask an organization, one would ask a Jewish spokesman, a Jewish leader, again, either in Israel or in the United States, but the concept of occupation. And a very simple question that follows. Occupation. When did occupation happen, assuming that you even buy into that false lexicon of occupation? I mean, for us, 1967, of course, was the liberation of territories, but nonetheless, if you ask your local AIPAC representative, occupation, when did it happen? The way that they will tell you, if you ask Blinken, occupation, a terrible word, a fraudulent word. When did it happen? They will all tell you it happened in 1967. But if you're asking honest Arab, and if you want to find out what Arabs honestly believe, just go to their social media. Occupation for them didn't begin in 1967. Occupation began in 1948.
Right.
We have a terrible disconnect, a divide as to what occupation means, because the Western world, the United Nations, the European Union, and most American Jewish organizations believe that we just have to somehow move some lines and borders and we settle the whole issue of occupation. And the last issue is, and all roads lead to this, the two-state solution, or the two-state illusion, or the two-state delusion, as I constantly say. Are you for or against a two-state solution? If you're for a two-state solution, you are blind to everything which has actually caused this war against the Jewish people, and you are a failed Jewish leader. When one looks, for example, in the United States at the Conference of Presidents of American Jewish Organizations, 52 different organizations, some of them aren't by nature political, but nonetheless they have their positions and everything else. A vast majority would answer incorrectly on every single one of these theoretical questions that I ask. There's one organization, for example, one that I used to be associated with, the Zionist Organization of America, which answered every one of the questions in the right way. They understand exactly what the score is. And yet, because of that, they've been marginalized by the other liberal American Jewish organizations who believe that occupation began in 1967. That if you move a couple of lines here and there, and let's go back to June 4th of 1967, you'll somehow find a peace partner. That yes, indeed, the war is territorial. It's all about land for peace. Israel will make concessions. The Arabs, I used to always talk about the Arabs. Israel gives, the Arab gets. That was the Israeli formula. On these four issues, if you ask an American Jewish spokesman, where does your organization stand on any of these, they will invariably be on the wrong side, and therefore we have a failed leadership. Allow me, Meir, because I don't want to. I want to talk about also the landscape in Israel. A lot of people misunderstand the way that these Israeli politics have worked. Israel, of course, is 76 years old now. The modern concept, the modern state of Israel. We know that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel 3,030 years ago. King David is the one who established it, wasn't Donald Trump. But nonetheless, let me just go back and do a very quick analysis of, let's say, the Knesset elections in Israel. In Israel, since 1949, there have been over 200 parties which ran at one time or another for the Knesset. For a piece of that 120 member, and of the 200 parties that have run over the years, 110 have actually been elected at one time or another. 110 parties. When one looks at what the divide is in Israel between, let's just call it for the moment, left and right, going back to the days of Ben Gurion versus Menachem Begin and such.
Yep.
The Ben Gurion, the Labor Party, the Alignment Party, the Mapai Party, they all, for the first, until 1977, they won every election. But there's some numbers which are absolutely telling, because you began by mentioning Naftali Bennett. And in most recent polls, showing this various juxtaposition of parties, if he runs with this party and this party joins this. And what do the polls show us today? The polls show us today that the party that's going to lead, is going to get the most mandates in any election, assuming that the polls are somewhat right, you're going to get 24, 25 seats. Well, if you go back to the first 12 elections in Israel's history, between 1949 and 1992, the average, no party that won, and when I say won, which got the majority, not the majority, the most mandate in the Knesset, which allowed it to be charged with the task of putting together the coalition, no party had less than 40 seats. None. In 1969, for example, the Alignment Party, the Labor Party, known otherwise as the Alignment, with Golda Meir, got 56 seats. Mind you, 61 necessary to govern. But the average was over 40. When you look at the next 13 elections, between 1996 and the most recent, the average number of seats that were won by the party that came in first in the election, therefore charged with the mandate of putting together the Knesset coalition. The average was 31.8. It was less than 32. And so you notice all of a sudden that you've got this fragmentation. It's no longer David Ben-Gurion against Menachem Begin, or Golda Meir against Menachem Begin. You know, talking about, at the time, Cherut, later Likud. You're not talking about the two major powers and then picking up the pieces and trying to put a coalition. Today you have the smorgasbord of parties. In the last election, Bibi Netanyahu was able to put together the present government, which has 64 mandates as part of the coalition. He had 32. 32 was 7 or 8 more than what the polls show today if there was an election held today. So the one takeaway that I'm trying to present is that the way that Israeli politics happened yesteryear, going back to the first generation and a half of Israel's existence, and juxtaposed to that second or third generation of Israel politics, is very different than what we see today. Today we see, I could mention a name of someone who used to be with Likud. He is now, he's now considered one of the people who might join Naftali Bennett in this effort. And you say, Gideon Sar. Ask people who actually follow Israeli politics, what party does he belong to? What party did he run under last time? It's completely fragmented. And with this fragmentation, what you have is what you were beginning to allude to, Meir, when you were talking about the fact about the photo, which I don't think succeeded in showing, which was Naftali Bennett with his delegation of visitors from J Street. They were all wearing their COVID masks, Jamal Bowman, and the others were just as bad as Bowman. Bowman just happens to be this boorish savage who can't control his love of Hamas. And he was dealt a blow, which is quite important, and I'll get to. But all of a sudden, you have Naftali Bennett, who represented himself when he ran for office, actually presented himself as, and he actually used the term, I will be 10% more right-wing than Bibi Netanyahu.
Right.
I don't know how one gauges the 10% as opposed to 12% or 9%. But he said, I will be 10% more right-wing. And of course, when he became the prime minister by hook and by crook,
right,
he brings in Mansour Abbas, and they form a coalition which failed miserably. So the problem we have today is that there's a reluctance on the part of leaders in Israel and in America to answer the question, and it's a question I'd mentioned ZOA. It's a question that ZOA certainly answers, and quite capably. These are the questions that one needs to ask of Jewish leadership and their constituents. Their constituents are the ones who keep them in office. The question is, when did the Palestinian people become a separate Palestinian nation? We know the answer. In 1964, with the creation of the PLO, they weren't just separate. And all you got to do is read Arab literature to find that out. The other question is, if 1967 was that demarcation, that pivotal, that occupation of Palestinian lands, the question that needs to be asked is, and we do ask it from our perspective, why was there no peace in 1966? And when one argues with all these idiots, these imbeciles, these ignoramuses on campus about anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, no, it isn't, yes, it is, and everything else. So let's predate this establishment of the modern state of Israel, 1948. If in fact this problem began with the establishment of the state of Israel in 1948, the very obvious question is, why were Arabs murdering Jews in the land of Israel in 1920, in 1921, in 1929, in the Arab revolt of 1936, 37, and 38? And the answer is it's a religious war. There were no borders which they were objecting to then. And yet, those Jewish leaders who actually address these issues and answer them honestly, they are in fact leaders. The tragic part of this leadership is that they don't necessarily speak. In fact, they don't speak for a majority of Jewish voices in America. American Jews are numb and dumb when it comes to Israel. And I'm going to make a comment which I think is controversial with an election coming up in November of this year.
Yep.
I had a discussion with one of my colleagues, and he always talks about the fact that the percentage of Jewish votes is going to begin to weigh more heavily towards the Republican and away from the Democrats because of, and his comment is, because of October 7th. And that is a myopic view of it. It isn't because of October 7th. October 7th didn't change the liberal Jewish proclivity in America. American Jews are by nature liberal, and as liberals, they vote for the Democratic Party, despite the fact that the Democratic Party has been quite kind to the very vicious anti-Semites within the Democratic Party. Bowman was one of it, and the rest of the squad. We're talking about Rashida Tlaib, we're talking about Ilhan Omar, we're talking about Presley.
Yes.
Jews, nonetheless, continue to support the Democrats. Here's my comment. The only time that when we began to see a shift in American Jews who might vote in greater numbers than before for the Republicans wasn't because of October 7th. It was when their own ox was gored. It was when anti-Semitism came to New York. It's when anti-Semitism came to Los Angeles. It's when anti-Semitism came to Harvard and Northwestern and Columbia. It was 100%. When they were threatened. It was a very selfish response. It was the right response. Yes. It was the right response, but it was a very selfish response. They weren't responding to October 7th. The numbers, the needle, the measure changed when they felt threatened themselves. When they all of a sudden felt that they couldn't walk the streets of New York without taking the kippah off their head. That's when they changed. And as a final comment about this, there's no question in my mind, and I am not a betting man, but I will certainly take this bet. The majority of Jewish voters in November of in November of this year, November 5th, 2024, the majority of Jewish votes will still go to the Democratic Party. The only difference was the percentage might go down. It might, instead of 74%, 73%, 69%, it might go down to 61 or 62%, which means that a majority of Jews in America, notwithstanding these trials and tribulations, are still going to vote for the Democrats. I'm sorry, I said one more sentence, but I'm going to add one more thing. Because when someone says to me, what are we going to do about it, Meir? What are we going to do about it? It's a very simple answer, and it's not going to happen. Because American Jews aren't wired this way. The American Jewish population is 1.8% of the American population. It's not 0.4% that the ADL, in its foolishness, they like to inflate the numbers, and the people that they count among that 2.4% are people who shouldn't be counted. The American Jewish population is 1% of the population. The dollars raised by the Democratic National Committee, over 50% is raised by American Jews. It's American Jewish money that's given to the Democratic Party. If the American Jewish leaders who don't exist on the liberal left, they don't exist. They have become not only obstacles, in many cases they are the enemy. If all of a sudden American Jewish organizations said, in light of the 7th, in light of the anti-Semitism, in light of the fact that the Democratic Party has done nothing to give us lip service, that they actually aided and abetted the enemy, we will no longer contribute our dollars to the Democratic Party. I will tell you that in 24 hours, policy will change. But American Jewish leaders are they will not do it because they don't have good leaders telling them what they need to do. And even if they were told, the problem. Do we have a problem? We do. Do we have a solution?
That's unbelievable. That's
not what is going to happen. Yeah.
That's an incredible stat. That's 50% of the funding for the Democratic Party comes from Jews, from liberal Jews. And the solution is quite clear. Yeah, just don't give them anymore. Stop it.
Allow me to mention just a footnote.
Yep.
In Israel, for the last 10 years, they give an award. It's the Genesis Award. They call it the Genesis Award.
Right.
Some people refer to it as the Jewish Nobel, the Jewish Nobel Prize. which is funny because the Jews already own the Nobel Prize. I don't know why, but nonetheless. So the Genesis Award is given. Spielberg has got celebrities in Israel, Jewish celebrities honored in Israel for their contributions to mankind. And it comes with $1 million prize. And precedent was set 10 years ago in which these people, they're all wealthy people, have decided that they're going to give their prize to various movements, organizations, and what have you that they celebrate, or that they, I should say, that they endorse. Well, Barbara Streisand, about a month and a half ago, 5 weeks ago, was named the recipient this year. Barbara Streisand, for her contributions to Israel, she sings a beautiful rendition of Kol Nidre. She sings a beautiful rendition, magnificent, of Hatikva. She says the right thing in the right circumstance. So she's getting $1 million, and she announced who she's going to give her money to. This Genesis Award, remarkable contribution to humanity, to mankind, the Jewish Award. And among the organizations, the climate change and the others that she mentioned was one that should have just absolutely jumped into a headline. One of the organizations she's going to give a lot of money to is the New Israel Fund. The New Israel Fund, an organization which is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, which actually pays for lawyers for Arab terrorists who murder Jews in Israel. So Barbara Price, recognized by Israel, is going to give her money, much of it, to the New Israel Fund. We are a perverted people who don't seem to understand that we have brought this terrible tragedy upon ourselves. It's terrible things.
I gotta cut off for 1 second. I gotta throw in my 2 cents. A large portion of the encampments pro-Hamas were funded by American Jews. I mean, that is the ultimate epitome of what you're saying. They know that. They know who funded Jewish Voices of Peace. We know who funds them. We know Soros funded a portion of it. So I'm going to click out now because I get too angry. But remember that the encampments all the way from California to New York, from UCLA to Columbia, were funded by American Jews. And of course, I can't help but to make one quick little comment that I know that you guys can't do without, particularly.
Absolutely.
I have to lean in. Oh, you can count on Gary to do that. In Israel, the president is going to awards Brothers in Arms, a Jewish an organization of the Ehud Barak, the Kaplan group, whatever. They're going to be getting an award. They were supposed to be getting an award in Israel. Brothers in Arms. These are the people who capitalized on October 7th, as you said, Meir, earlier, and have gone after. They're using the opportunity to say, we can exploit this opportunity to bring down the Prime Minister of Israel. Okay, we will defy democracy. It doesn't matter that he was elected democratically. We're going to destroy democracy the way that it was structured in order to save democracy, which is their thing. By the way, what Gary said, he's right about. If one goes to Instagram, on social media, Instagram, and you look at the things that J Street has done, you look at the things that Breaking the Silence has done, and if you look at If Not Now, 3 anti-Semitic organizations. They're Jewish anti-Semitic organization. If you go and look at what ZOA has done on campus, this wonderful effort to try and educate the Jewish student on campus to fight the fight as it needs to be fought, the numbers are small. If you look, I'll give you a number. I mean, those numbers are in a couple of thousand. If Not Now has a following on Instagram of 184,000 people. If Not Now is an organization of Jewish leftists who basically think that Israel has no right to exist.
Right.
We're pro-Palestinian, we're pro-Hamas, and yet you had 184,000 stooges, dangerous stooges who actually follow them. We have failed. And when we do have brave leaders who stand up and say the right thing. I mentioned the Zionist Organization of America, always saying the right thing. A much smaller group, Americans for Safe Israel. These are the ones who are ostracized by the greater Jewish establishment. Tragically. Tragically.
Another aspect, Mayor, is you mentioned religious war. So Hasbara organizations, they pride themselves on pointing out that they're in the Supreme Court of Israel is an Arab judge who sent to jail an Israeli prime minister and the presidents of Israel, previous presidents of Israel. That's a problem. That's a serious problem. So if you want a Jewish state, you have to define what a Jewish state is. What are we fighting for exactly? Royce Fagelin speaks often about the identity of the country, and I 100% agree with that. That's it should be very clear. This is a Jewish state, and Jews are running the country, and in the driver's seat, 100%.
Yeah, you mentioned Fagelin. I know you and I mentioned this in a private conversation. Of the same ilk, Shmuel Sackett had a piece that an op-ed that appeared earlier this week, and the title of it was "When Will the War in Gaza End?" And in the narrative, in the body of text, he asks a more important question, and it's a question that we ought to be asking: when will the war in Gaza start? Because Israel has not fought the type of war necessary to destroy, the word that Israel has used so long. All of a sudden, you have not only the Daniel Hagari, Israel's spokesman, who talked about the fact that Hamas can't be defeated because it's an idea. You have Tzachi Hanegbi.
Right.
Mind you, this is Chomet Ben Yayin, whatever. You're talking about Tzachi Hanegbi, who's the son of Geula Cohen,
Right.
the voice,
right.
the radio voice of underground voice of Lehi. He was the fellow who, mind you, who was leading the student revolt against the IDF when they were trying to throw the Jews out of Yamit, in which they ultimately did. And all of a sudden, he's with his national security advisor position. This is the same Tzachi Hanegbi who joined Kadima and Ehud Olmer and brought us this engagement, which was part of the problem that we now see. We now have received the fruits, the end result of this engagement of August 2005. Tzachi Hanegbi comes out and in an interview basically says Hamas is an idea that can't be defeated. So as I mentioned, Tzachi Hanegbi and everything else, allow me to do this because we wanted to talk about Jewish leadership and where they fit. If you look at certain pivotal moments in modern Jewish history, allow me to mention a couple where Jewish leadership simply failed, where ultimately Jewish leadership didn't fail. I was no fan of David Ben-Gurion. I was not around when he decided that George Marshall was wrong, that the United States was wrong, that even though Israel was threatened with annihilation, Israel would nonetheless declare a Jewish state because it was the right thing to do. And Israel, as much as it was a feeble military enterprise, it prevailed, as it did in 1967. So let me get, in 1967, Israel did what was best for Israel. It understood that the threat was existential. It did not fight the political war. It fought a military war. The world at the time understood why Israel did it. Whatever criticism came and went. Let me begin with 1973. In 1973, Kissinger, we all know this. This is nothing new to any of the listeners, the viewers. 1973, Israel understands that there's going to be an impending attack by the Arab nations, primarily Egypt and, of course, Syria. And Kissinger tells Israel, do not strike first. Gives them a directive no different than the Blinken directive that we hear foolishly thrown against Israel today. And Israel decided that it was going to play the political game and not strike first. Right. And it was by a stroke of luck and an Arab misinterpretation of Israel's hesitance in the Sinai that Israel was able to survive. 2,656 Israeli soldiers died because Israel played a political game and didn't do what it needed to do. And if you go further, this was 1973. In 1993, Jewish leaders, because of American pressure, decided that they were going to accept Oslo. They were going to accept Oslo. Oslo, peace with the biggest mass murderer of Jewish children since Hitler, Yasser Arafat. Israel extends its feeble hand and shakes the hand of Arafat, Rabin, and Shimon Peres. Organizations like the ZOA and other right-wing Americans for say protested and said this is a mistake. If there's going to be peace, the quid pro quo should be peace. It should not be territory, it should not be concessions, it should not be. And we now live with countless Jews who died in the 31 years since Oslo. Oslo was a terrible mistake. Israeli leaders made the mistake. They failed, as did American Jewish leaders who supported them. We jump ahead. We go to the year 2000. Ehud Barak, who was a successful military person, a very intelligent man, and a very bad man. Ehud Barak decides that we need to withdraw from Lebanon. Israel withdraws from Lebanon and opens the door for Hezbollah. And every rocket that falls in Israel today, you can thank Ehud Barak for. That was the year 2000. We move ahead to August 2005. Disengagement. In disengagement, Israeli leaders went for it. Yes, this will prove to the world that we will do whatever we need to do in order, and we've paid the price since. Every Jew that died who need not have died because of a miscalculation or malfeasance on the part of Israeli and in this case also American Jewish leaders who supported these actions. And October 7th was the last of these failures. Jewish leaders in Israel, and I'm talking about in the intelligence field, in the political field, and in the military field, they failed. They failed miserably. It was 50 years plus 1 day after the start of the Yom Kippur War.
Right.
In 50 years, maybe for 50 years they learned the lesson, but after 1 day too much, they failed. And all these people who died then, and all the people who are dying now, and all the people who will yet die because of the terrorists who are being released in exchange for hostages. This notion, by the way, that Israel says we want all the hostages back. They're playing us. All the hostages are not coming back. And I don't mean just those who have died. If anyone actually thinks, nobody knows what the real number is, and if anybody actually believes that Hamas is going to release all the hostages in exchange for this peace ceasefire that is being brokered, we are once again proving the myth of Jewish intelligence.
If we believe there could be a hostage deal, then I guess there would not be an Entebbe raid. They would have negotiated with Idi Amin back then.
That's
But
right.
there was an Entebbe raid, and we rescued almost all of them. Some died, not many, but we rescued them. You know, there's one, you know, when you go on about Ehud Barak retreated from Lebanon, I just want to point out that the previous government, when Naftali Bennett handed the reins to Yair Lapid, he signed the deal that was negotiated with the American representative to Lebanon, Amos Hochstein,
Yeah.
and signed the deal that was supposed to delineate the maritime border, and it was, according to good people in Israel, this was like a retreat. This was making Israel weaker. And Yair Lapid was on record, no, it makes Israel stronger. This is going to be great for us. And the natural gas fields that we have, now we're going to send natural gas to Europe, and everything's going to be fine. And this is a deterrence against Hezbollah. Look at the situation right now. Who's responsible? He's not the only one responsible for it, as you pointed out, with Ehud Barak and the retreats, and we had deterrence when we were there. This is the situation right now. So it's horrible leadership, and they want elections now to get rid of Bibi. Exactly what do they want? What do they want to do? Well, we have on record what they did before. And unfortunately, you have a global public, some in Israel, that it resonates with. But certainly not everyone. Certainly the morale, what I'm hearing anyways, of the soldiers that are going into Gaza, the morale is unbelievable, and the youth is unbelievable, and they're in touch with their identity. And this is a religious war. This is the Jews and the Muslims, and that's what the war is. This is not about territory, and Hamas makes it very clear. And their support base in North America, when they're protesting, they're saying from the river to the sea, and go back to Europe, go back to the gas chambers. They bring swastikas in front of our synagogues. They make it clear who they are, and we can't sanitize them. And any Jewish leader that tries to sanitize them, we have to diminish their power so that they cannot have an influence in the Jewish community. It's gotten to that point. It's not an issue of free speech or anything like that. This is an issue of survival.
Yeah, you mentioned on something which I just want to strengthen, because I certainly believe when the history of this particular era is written, and we're talking about October 7th and the many months that followed, there's only one element that's going to emerge as being heroes. The politicians failed completely.
Yep.
The military senior command failed miserably. Israeli intelligence failed miserably. Academia continues to fail. The media fails completely. The only element, and it was a pleasant surprise, tragic that we've lost so many of them, the soldiers at the lower level, the 18-year-olds, the 18 to 22-year-olds, and also those career people who were the lieutenants, the captains, the majors. And I will not go any higher because they're the ones who failed the senior command. These are the people history will show, and the ones from reserves, all the ones from reserves who have given up the wonderful lifestyle that they had.
Incredible. It's incredible.
Have lost friends, have lost relatives, and have lost limbs trying to defend Israel. They are the heroes of this generation, and they will be recorded as such. They are the true heroes. They're the only ones where the spirit, where Zionism still lives. It's the liberal leftists who believe that we live in this post-Zionist era. And all of a sudden, what we want to do is we want to be loved by the world. And by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't make a comment that even our side, meaning the right of center, and the right is partially to blame. When the Abraham Accords happened, everyone was elated. The way that some people were happy when Oslo happened, and everyone was elated. I was against it for one reason. If it was peace for peace, I was completely for it. If it was peace for peace, and mind you, Israel was making peace. Excuse me, I want to correct myself because that's a mistake that the Israeli government makes. Israel was having a normalization of relations with nations which never actually were at war with Israel. The fraudulent claim that came from the Bibi administration itself was that he said we have peace with the UAE, with Bahrain, we're looking for a peace with Sudan, we're looking for a peace with Morocco, and so on and so forth. There was a quid pro quo attached. And that quid pro quo, never mind that the Americans, as part of the condition, were going to give armaments, jets, to the so-called moderate Arab states. Never mind that the reason that they did it was because Israel was considered a reliable check against the Iranians, whereas the Americans weren't. The quid pro quo here was that the Israeli government said that they would hold back, suspend Israel and the Jewish claim to sovereignty in Judea and Samaria.
Right.
And I, at the time, argued that this was a terrible mistake. My colleagues who supported the move of the Abraham Accords said, "Oh, don't worry, Jared Kushner, he'll see to it that Israel gets to annex Efrat, and next Gush Etzion, and so on and so forth. Once again, we failed. We failed ourselves. We have to stop pretending. Israel has no peace with any of its Arab neighbors. We know today why. I mean, it's quite clear why the United States didn't want Israel to go into Rafah. Doesn't want Israel to go to Rafah because we would find out the collusion of the Egyptians with Hamas.
Right.
If Israel does what is best for Israel and gives the rest of the world that opposes that move the middle finger, Israel will survive nicely. It's when Israel capitulates to Western pressures by the so-called friends, and I say the so-called friends of Israel, that we pay a very, very heavy price, and we have to stop paying the price. And I see that the clock is running out, my friend.
Right. Listen, Meir, it's been terrific having you on. We talked about failed Jewish leaders. There's so much we could speak about, but one who spoke the truth, our rabbi, and he was very clear on it, Rabbi Meir Kahana, and he said from the start what the issue is, and you could watch a speech by him, and you could say he's addressing the very issue today. It's incredible. It's incredible. But Meir, thank you very much for joining us. We'll do it again. There's so much to discuss moving forward. There's so much at stake right now. We're at a historical period of time for the Jewish people and the world against Israel. But it's a good thing because we have a Jewish state today and we have what to fight for today. And we're not living in Poland and we're not going back, and we'll fight, and we have to fight hard, and we'll speak out. We have to be critical of leadership, and it's for the good. Our number one principle has always been Ahavat Israel, so we have to speak the truth because we care about the Jewish people, care about Israel. Thank you, Meir. Any final comments?
Amen.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And whoever has watched this, if you could please share this on social media, we would appreciate it. Thank you very much. Shalom, shalom.
Thank you, Meir.
Thank you.